Hello, how's everybody doing? Just give me a second here while I post something on the link. Uh, just posting a link to my YouTube channel on the link in Twitter, and I'm also going to post it up here in the comments. And just want to ask you guys to do me a small favor if you're watching on Twitter, which I think most people will be watching on Twitter. That's where most of my following is. I'm trying to build up a YouTube account. I just started a couple of weeks ago and I've got like 500 subscribers already. So I'm pretty happy about that. But I'd like to get another 500. I'd like to get monetized. And It'd be great if you guys could help me do that. If you want to just click on there. And if you like what I have to say, then like and subscribe. I think, like with this program I've been doing and just overall, I think there are so many things in our politics that we can't address in 30-second sound bites. We can't address in like little glib comments or tweets that actually need real thought. And I'm trying to kind of build up a library of things where I talk to people that really know what they're talking about. And, I've been doing my explainer videos and posting those on there and some other things. So I'm just, like trying to have it. I'm trying to build it up also as a library of things where there's more substantive conversation that can happen than you can get on just a Twitter account. I think that's what we really need in our country today is actual, real insightful conversation with actual knowledgeable people. And I'm not trying to say I'm the knowledgeable person. That's why I'm trying to find knowledgeable people to have conversations with. And hopefully we'll be doing a lot more interviews with those people on this show. There's a couple of interviews with Dr. Weitz, who is a historian that talked about asylum and how we got to where we are with our current situation in the southern border and our history there. He's a historian that has a real expertise in South American history. And then also with Dr. Schwab, who is a health economist who really had some great insights into our current healthcare system and how it compares with Europe and what reasons we can't necessarily just do what Europe does. But he also had some really good ideas in terms of what we could do with our current infrastructure and how we and he also had some really good insight into why Kamala Harris's home care expansion it would be a great idea. So anyway, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and at some point, go ahead and click on my YouTube channel. And if you like what's there, subscribe. And if you don't, that's okay too. But just trying to build up a little bit of a more following on my YouTube channel. So I'd really appreciate that if you did that. But today I wanted to talk about the economy. And, like back in the 90s, there was the whole, it's the economy stupid. Hi, William. Hey, I got somebody commenting from my YouTube channel, so I really appreciate that. The reason that I wanted to talk, so I wanted to talk today about the economy. And back in the 90s, Bill Clinton was, like in 96, he ran on this idea. It's the economy stupid, or was it 92? I forget. Anyway, and they would ask, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? So in 92, people weren't better off. We were in a recession. And, so Bill Clinton won on that. And then in 96, we were better off. Bill Clinton had a really good economy. They've been trying to reproduce this. The Republicans have been rhetorically asking, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the reality is, most Americans are. And if you point out this, then people, you get some that are like, well, not everybody, and you're heartless if you point it out, as though, first of all, they're the ones that asked it rhetorically, as though, you're not. So, but the reality is, most of Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago. And the economy overall is significantly better off than it was 4 years ago. And Joe Biden and the Democrats have not gotten nearly as much credit as they deserve for that. One of the things that I did is I went back, and here's what we should be asking. It's not just, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is not quite the accurate question, because where we were 4 years ago was in the middle of a pandemic. And so people will be like, oh, well, Donald Trump, it wasn't his fault. And we can reevaluate how much of it was his fault. Like, we didn't have to have the worst response in the world, but we did. But setting that aside, where were we supposed to be 4 years from where were we supposed to be now 4 years ago is the more accurate question. In 2020, what were we really hoping we could be at in 2024 versus where we actually are in 2024? So if we're better off than we were supposed to be, Joe Biden should get credit for that, right? If you go back and you look at the CBO report about, like what a reasonable recovery would be, it says in there that, and there was a range, but like the down the middle, the reasonable hope would be that by the end of 2024, the unemployment rate would be 6%, right? 6%. And we have been right around 4% for like 3 years. Sometimes it's a little bit over, sometimes it's a little bit under. Most economists consider full employment at 5%, and right around 4% is where we were at before the pandemic. So were we supposed to be where we are? No, we are much further along than where we were supposed to be. Like, the best hopes if I had told you in 2020 that we would be at 4% unemployment, that the GDP, here's the next thing, GDP in 2020 was 20 trillion and some change, and we had actually retracted because of the pandemic. But we are now way over that. We're around 28 trillion. We're way past where we were in 2019. And we're even past, if you went back to 2019 and looked at our projections of where we would be in 2024, again, where were we supposed to be? Not where are we, but where were we supposed to be? If you went back to 2019 and you were to project real GDP, which is a little different than actual GDP, real GDP adjusts for inflation. So before we start getting into the inflation thing, we were supposed to be like around 26 trillion. We are actually better than we were projected to be in 2019 without the pandemic. Like in 2019, we didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. Right now, our economy is better in 2024 than we thought it would be in 2019 before we even knew a pandemic would happen. So Donald Trump doesn't get credit for that. The next thing we have to consider is when we were in 2019, how much credit does Trump deserve for that? And yesterday in the speech, Donald Trump or Barack Obama pointed out that the economy that Trump boasts about was actually Obama's economy. And if you go back again and you look in 2016 and 2014 and 2012 and 2011, the economy had already been growing at a certain rate under Obama. Obama took over from the Great Recession. And so like the first couple of years were recovery years. They weren't great, but they were a lot better than 2008. So 2009 it got better. 2010 we got even better. And then we were on a projected growth from 2010 all the way up to 2020 when we hit the recession because of the pandemic. But if you look at 2017, after, well, 2018, after Trump's tax cuts took effect, the growth rate actually slowed. And the CBO says that it actually hurt the economy. Trump's tax cuts overall actually hurt the economy and slowed the growth down. So does Trump get credit? Trump doesn't deserve credit for the economy in 2019. And if you watch the first episode ever of West Wing, there's a little term there called post hoc ergo propter hoc. And what that means is this because of this, or because of this. When I think it's because of this. Anyway, what it means is this, because of this, that, something like that. But the idea that just because something happened while something else was true does not mean that something else happened because something else was true. Because the economy was good under Trump does not mean that the Trump was good because of the economy was good because of Trump. It just, these two things happen to be true at the same time. And people will look at the pandemic and they'll say, well, it's not Trump's fault that he was just president during the pandemic. It would have been true under Hillary if she had won, which there are actual measures that Trump took that maybe hurt us. So that's not entirely true, but the logic is the same. And they excuse Trump for that, but they don't look at Trump's, successful economy and use the same logic there either. They want to say that the economy was good because of Trump, but the pandemic had nothing to do with Trump. He just happened to be president while it happened. So there's an inconsistency in their logic and a dishonesty in the logic of that. The economy continued to grow in spite of Trump, not because of Trump. And there wasn't anything else. So you can say, well, why wouldn't the same thing apply to Obama then? Or why wouldn't the same thing apply to Biden? And it's because there are actual things that they got passed and actual things they did that had to do with the economy that stimulated the economy and caused it to grow. Trump never did anything like that. Trump did not have like some, the American Rescue Plan or can't think of the one Obama had. Like they actually passed legislation while they were president that stimulated the economy and caused it to grow. That's why they should get credit for it. Trump never did anything. He just happened to be president while the economy did well. I mean, he just didn't manage to mess it up until something actually happened that he had to be president and do something intelligent with. As soon as he was actually tested, he failed miserably. So then the economy crashed in 2020. Trump Infrastructure Week. We're still waiting for that. I think he's got a concept of a plan for that. So once Trump was president, so Trump, kind of messed everything up in terms of the pandemic response. The economy crashed. Unemployment went down. Or unemployment went through the roof. I'm sorry. We were losing jobs left and right. Then, during the shutdowns, and then things started to kind of build back up a little bit. And then Biden got elected. We had the American Rescue Plan, and we weren't supposed to get to unemployment of 6% until the end of this year. Instead, by the summer of 2021, we were back down to around 4.2%. And that's because of the American Rescue Plan. There was legislation that got passed that had an immediate impact on the economy and actually caused people to get jobs. And the narrative is that these are bounce back jobs, right? But if you remember, I feel like sometimes I'm isolated in a world where I'm the only one that actually remembers what things were like 2 or 3 years ago, because, but anyway, if you remember back in 2021, there was all of this stuff about, like, if you went to McDonald's, you know, and you went to the drive-thru, you had to wait 10 minutes to get your Big Mac because nobody wanted to work again, and nobody wanted to go to McDonald's or work at McDonald's because they were all too good for McDonald's now. And so, you know, like, these jobs weren't getting filled. But these were the first jobs and the main jobs that were lost during the pandemic. So this idea that all the jobs that came back were just bounce back jobs does not actually jibe with reality. It's not what happened. The first jobs that came back were not the first jobs that were lost. What happened is that other jobs came to replace those jobs, and then people filled those jobs, and then because those new jobs were getting filled, then once those new jobs got filled, then thanks, William. Those new jobs got filled, then that followed up with the hospitality jobs being filled again. Like, so, you know, people were working again. They had their jobs. They, you know, okay, I'm going to go out to McDonald's and I'm going to just go through the drive-thru. Still a little bit concerned about COVID, but, you know, and now there was somebody working at McDonald's because they were getting customers again. And so the last jobs, if you go back and you look at all the job reports, the last jobs that were coming back were the hospitality jobs. If you go back to 2020, the first jobs that were lost were the hospitality jobs. So this idea that it was inevitable for those jobs to come back, and Joe Biden was just, you know, kind of riding Trump's coattails on that or something like that. It's so weird that it's like it's giving Trump credit for Biden's job performance. You know, oh, well, those jobs were just lost because of the pandemic. Those are really Trump jobs. No, they're not Trump jobs. They're actually Biden jobs. And then eventually the last jobs are because of Biden too, because those are only coming back because the other jobs happened. All right. So that's the whole job thing. That's like, I'm not an economist, you know, I just read stuff and remember stuff. And this is like, you know, I'm sorry if that bothers anybody, but I just happen to remember all these people complaining about, you know, jobs not getting filled. And, you know, some of these jobs that weren't getting filled because people really weren't trying to fill them. They were just trying to get out of having to pay back their PPP loans. And so they were just, advertising for the jobs, but they didn't really want somebody to come and work there. They just wanted to pretend that they did so that when nobody came and worked there, they could get the money forgiven. And then they could complain that nobody wanted to work. And so they couldn't reopen their business, when actually the ones that really didn't want to work are the ones that didn't want to reopen their business, because it was just a lot easier to get paid $200,000 to not work. Okay, so then the irony builds, right? So what happens then is that inflation starts to happen. And the idea of inflation was that the reason that they would say that inflation was Obama's fault, or was Biden's fault, is because of his stimulus plan. And so then you inject all this money into the economy. And then because you put all this money into the economy, everybody has more money to spend. Since they're spending more money, then that means that demand goes up without supply going up, which means prices go up, right? So there's this to me now, like there's a contradiction, right? Like you can't both say that the Joe Biden doesn't deserve any credit for all these jobs coming back, and then blame him for the inflation caused by allegedly all these jobs coming back. It's got to be one or the other, right? Either all these jobs came back and inflation happened and he gets credit for the jobs and he gets the blame for inflation, or all these jobs came back and he doesn't get job credit and he doesn't get inflation blame. You know, and that's assuming that the premise of the argument is true, that the reason that inflation happened is because of the stimulus spending, which I think that one of the problems we have when we talk about inflation is that there's a singular cause of inflation. Like, this is the reason we had inflation. When actually there are several reasons that we have inflation. And we've had inflation over the last 4 years. And some of them are like really specific to a product. And some of them are more tertiary or secondary or tertiary even. So for instance, one of the reasons we had inflation is the supply chain issues. And it's not just like one thing. Like we couldn't import new cars from Japan, right? It was that we couldn't import microchips. And the microchips make a lot of things, including new cars. Go into, the microchips go into the new cars. So we can have everything else for the new car, but if we don't have the microchip, we can't complete the new car, right? We need that one thing. And so since the microchips aren't available, we can't sell as many new cars. And since we can't sell as many new cars, supply goes down while demand is going up because people are getting back to work and they do have jobs now. And so they're going out and they want to buy a new car. But they can't get a new car because there's not as many of them. And so the price goes up. Then, because they still need a new car, and they still need a car, they end up buying used cars. So now you have more people buying used cars. So that causes the cost of used cars to go up. And pretty much everything else that needs a microchip, same thing. That is not Biden's fault. That's the pandemic, and that's even other countries. Like some of this you can't even blame Trump for. It's not Trump's fault that we had a supply chain shortage. But if Trump were president, we still would have had a supply chain shortage. It's not like Trump would have just been able to babble incoherently for 10 minutes and solve that. Like, we still would have had that inflation, whether Trump was president, whether Biden was president, whether our jobs were back, whether they weren't, we still would have had the issue because we would not have had the computer chips. Like, there was no way that that was going to get changed. So that's something that we covered a little bit, like the media covered a little bit in the first year of inflation. But in the process of the election season, we've kind of lost sight of it. And so if you go and you look at some of the fact checks and stuff on the job market or on job recovery, they'll always factor in COVID response or, like COVID and factor in, these are the bounce back jobs. But you'll never see COVID factored in to the inflation, right? And a significant chunk of that was because of the COVID shortages. But there, even that was not the only reason. There were other reasons, and some of it was the stimulus spending. But if you look at the U.S. versus the rest of the world, our inflation was actually, significantly lower than like the other developed countries like Europe. There's some reports, I can post those on the link later. Like, there's some studies, and these are admittedly Democrat-leaning studies to try to isolate out, how much of this was actually, how much of the inflation was actually because of stimulus spending. And, they'll tell you like 2 or 3%. But even if you double that and you say, okay, it's like 6%, or even if you triple it and say 9%, then you still have to look at the logic of it. And if the logic of it is that this inflation is going up, has something to do with the jobs, then you also have to look at wage growth, right? And since Biden took office, You can look and prices are up about 20%, but wages are up 26%. And this is what we call real wage growth, right? And if you look at real wage growth, we actually, like right now, you're making more money after inflation than you were in 2019. It's about 20%, 26% wage growth versus 20% inflation. So if I told you in 4 years you're going to make 26% more money, but things are going to cost 20% more, would you make that trade-off? And it's like, unless you are mathematically illiterate, you would say, yes, that's a good deal to me. And it's, yes, prices go up, and you can aggregate those prices to kind of disingenuously make it look more. If you were to go back 50 years, things cost like 300-400% as much as they used to. I'm from, I was born in 1967. I remember in 1976 when gas went over $1 and people were freaking out about that. Can you imagine if gas went back down to $1? Like, there's this idea that because inflation is coming down, like, unless we get to deflation or something to where prices are going back down to what they were in 2019, it's not real. And that's not an honest way to look at it. There's no way you can make Trump president. Trump's not going to bring things back down to prices that they were in 2019. And he never really did anything to keep inflation down anyway, unless you consider his terrible, terrible response to the pandemic that caused gas prices to go down. All right, so there's other things that caused inflation. And this is like, why is some of the reasons why worldwide inflation is actually higher than US inflation. And one of them has to do with the fact that you may have heard of this. Russia invaded Ukraine. Did you know that? Because we never seem to talk about how that affects inflation. But Russia invaded Ukraine. And while Trump didn't know this until Lev Parnas explained it to him, Ukraine has a bunch of oil, right? And most of Europe gets its oil from Ukraine. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, well, that stifled the oil supply. And so because there was less oil, again, back to supply and demand didn't get changed, supply did. That means the price of oil went up. That means Europe had to get its oil from other places in the world. And then other countries that had oil recognized this, and so they started raising their price for oil. And so that caused the price of oil to go up worldwide. And we export oil. And so if you're a U.S. oil company, people will be like, why would that affect U.S.? Well, if you're a U.S. oil company and you can sell oil overseas, if you can export oil for a higher cost than if you sell it domestically, why would you not export it? So then the price of domestic oil goes up, which means the price of domestic gas goes up. So Russia invading Ukraine actually caused the price of gas to go up. And this is where we get into secondary and tertiary inflation. So the price of gas goes up, right? And then we move so much of our product by truck, which means gas prices. So the price of shipping things goes up, which means that when you have to factor that into the end sale price, right? So all of these things combine to cause inflation. Then another thing that happened is once inflation happens, people accept it's happened. Like they don't like, I'm okay with inflation, but it's not unexpected. You go to the grocery store and lettuce went up 5 cents a head, and you're just like, I can't believe it went up another 5 cents a head. But you just kind of factor into, okay, this is just, it costs the grocery store more or whatever. You don't like really think about it. And then you find out later that like I think it's three companies. And if I'm wrong on this, feel free to correct me, anybody in the comments. But I think it's like 3 corporations own most of the grocery stores in the US, right? And apparently, and this is like, I think Kroger's one of them, and they've admitted it, they gouged prices. They got together and they said, you know what? Since inflation's going up anyway, let's just jack it up even more. And so they did. They raised the price of lettuce by 5 cents a head, and then you paid it, and then you never thought that maybe it was just corporate greed going on. And so all these corporations that had this, that were involved in this price gouging, were making like record profits while all this inflation was happening. And you're blaming Biden instead of blaming the corporations that were jacking up prices and basically just taking advantage of the fact that inflation is bad. And I see some people like, well, we'll blame it all on the price gouging, but it's not just that either. You know, it's, yes, there is a portion of that that's because of the Ukraine war, and now because of the war, the Gulf War, and there's some of it that's because of Biden stimulus spending, and there's some of it that's still because of residue from the price gouging, and then you know the Fed rate going up does increase the mortgage, but then you have Republicans that will add, like they'll act like, okay, your mortgage went up 40% because of inflation, and it's like, well, only if you bought a new house, in which case your mortgage didn't really go up. You just have a mortgage where you didn't before, or depending on things. But it's not like the Fed rate went up and now you're paying 40% more for your monthly housing payment that you've been paying since 1997. Like, there's a dishonesty in saying in the way they calculate some of these things. Like, the average American does not buy a new house every year. So then, but the Fed rate goes up to bring down inflation, and then they use that Fed rate going up to bring down inflation to make it look like inflation is causing the Fed rate to go up. And so, like, it's another thing where they're trying to have it both ways. So all of these things together work together to combine inflation. And some percentage of it is due to Biden, but other things are going to happen regardless of who the president is. But the question we have to ask is, would the job be the same? And would the wage growth be the same without Biden? Would Trump have the same wage growth, and would Trump have the same job recovery rate? And the answer is no, because those things are actually attributable to actual packages that Biden got passed. We'd still be waiting 2 more weeks for an infrastructure bill if Trump were president again. All right, so that's one aspect of things that I'd like to talk about. The other aspect is looking forward. Like, that's just the last 4 years. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are different people. And I would say, on a certain level, Donald Trump and Donald Trump are different people. Like, 2016 Donald Trump and 2024 Donald Trump are not the same. 2016 Donald Trump was Mussolini. 2024 Trump is Hitler. Like, he has become significantly less competent, significantly more hateful, and significantly more damaging to the economy. So we can't just go, oh, okay, well, we survived the first time, even though, like, during the last year of his presidency, we forget. Like, we had the last year of his presidency, we had the worst pandemic in over a century. We had the worst economic year in nearly a century, and we had the most civil unrest in half a century. So that was Trump's America. Like, it took him 3 years to get there, but once he got there, you want to know a year that was actually Donald Trump? 2020 is what he did. It just took him 3 years to mess everything up that bad. If we go into 2024, or if he's president in 2025, it won't take him 3 years to mess everything up that bad this time. And one reason I know this is here's a thing for you that you go and you look at people in his first administration and who they are endorsing for president now. If the only people that voted for the 2024 election were people that were in his first administration, his actual cabinet members and upper tier people in his own administration, Kamala Harris would win in a landslide. Kamala Harris would win in a landslide if the only people that voted for Trump were members of his own administration. Like, what does, like, isn't that mind-boggling? So can you imagine if like like over half of Joe Biden's administration were endorsing Trump? Don't you think we'd hear more of that? I don't understand why we don't talk about that aspect of things, but here we are. Okay, so Donald Trump wants to do these mass deportations, and I talked about this yesterday, that this would have a massive effect on our economy, and it would also cost a lot of money. But here's another aspect of this that is not being considered, and that is he's talked about these camps, right? And they would hold these immigrants in these camps, but it's not like you can just deport people. You know, like we need an agreement with a country in order to deport them, and there are some countries like I think Argentina maybe is one of them. Not Argentina. Anyway, my mind's blank. But as a South American country, the other South American country that starts with A. So we don't have we don't have an extradition treaty with them. So we can't just send people there. And you can put them on a plane and send that plane to that country, but the plane will never get clearance to land. Like those people will never be able to get off the plane in that country. And you can't just say, okay, we're just going to send them to Mexico because we need an agreement with Mexico. Like, can you imagine if Mexico said, oh, we're just going to get rid of all our immigrants. And so they just sent them to the U.S. You think we'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, we'll take them. I mean, you need an agreement with Mexico for that. If you're going to send them to a third country, that third country has to accept them. So where are you going to send them to? Like, if you don't have a treaty, do you think that any other country is going to be like, yes, send us millions of immigrants that you don't want? So, you know, this is one of the things that actually people have asked, what has Kamala Harris done? One of the things she's done is, you know, like working with the immigration issues is we've had a record 170 countries now that we have treaties with. And we actually lost some of those treaties under the first Trump administration because, you know, he has to be a dick about things. So like we were able to repatriate people to Cuba. Now we can't, then we couldn't do that again under Trump. Now we can again. But these things are not that cut and dry. So what happens then to these people that are in these concentration camps? I'm sorry, did I say concentration camps? I meant concentration camps. These people that are in immigration / concentration camps, they're how long? Like, what are we doing with them? Are they just there? Who how are they being paid for? You know, and how long is it before we start looking at, like, you know, gas ovens to solve the problem? Because we can't send them somewhere, and you've got right wingers that don't want to pay for them to just exist and live. So what do you do with them? We don't talk about that. But either way, how does that affect the economy? You've got to pay for these camps. You've got to pay for the people that monitor the camps. You've got to pay for them to be built. You've got to pay for, you know, for all of this stuff. And then you're taking police off the streets to do it. You're taking the National Guard. And National Guard is not like, you don't join the National Guard as a full-time job, right? You join the National Guard as a weekend job, and then you have your full-time job. But if all of a sudden your National Guard job becomes your full-time job because you have to go and guard immigrants, then you don't have your full-time job anymore. And then that means that the person that had that was employing you has lost their employee. But now they don't, where are they going to, we're already at full employment. You're deporting everybody and you're taking away a significant, like millions of people off the workforce to go guard these immigrants. So what happens? I mean, like we don't look at how much this mass deportation thing is going to affect the economy, and it's going to be devastating. So the other aspect of it is, you know, like if you look at Kamala Harris's plans, and I think one thing we haven't given nearly enough focus on is this idea she has to incentivize construction companies to build 3 million new homes. Like the number one reason that we have a housing crisis is that we just don't have enough houses. Since 2008, since the housing bubble burst, the construction over the last 16 years has been the lowest it's been in American history for new homes. And people don't understand that. Like the number one, there are other contributory factors, like, investments buying up the investors buying up new homes, or the lower value homes that would be normally the ones that first time home buyers move into. And that is an aspect of it. But the biggest aspect is we just don't have new homes being built. And so Kamala Harris wants to say, okay, let's incentivize people to build these new homes, whereas Donald Trump wants to get rid of all the immigrants, when like 40% of the construction employees are these undocumented workers that he wants to deport. And so, like when you look at those plans, which one is actually going to help the economy better? And when I've looked at some of these reports on who's going to have a better effect on the economy, none of them, I have not seen one of them. Maybe one exists, but like none of them, they just look at the tax policy. I haven't seen any that actually look at what kind of impact is Donald Trump's deportation going to have on the economy. And I haven't seen anybody ask Donald Trump about how to handle that. Like, and it's not like Americans are just gonna, oh yeah, anybody out there, like raise your hand if you would be, like if it weren't for those undocumented workers, you'd move to Wisconsin to milk cows for a living. Like, these are not jobs that most Americans are like, wishing they could have. They're not jobs being taken away from Americans, but they're jobs that need to be done. Like the most, like so many of our essential workers during the pandemic were undocumented workers. So many of them. And we just gloss over that. And we gloss over their positive impact on the economy and just the devastating impact of the economy if they were, just sucked out of it. So, I just really wanted to hone in on, like this whole, it's the economy stupid thing, because we don't really talk about the economy. We just talk about how the economy was in 2019 compared to inflation today. And that is not a real assessment of the economy or what kind of president Kamala versus Trump 2 would be in 2024 or 2025. So I'm going to just so I think that's my little rant for today. I'm going to go through and look at some of these comments that have been popping up that I haven't had a chance to get to, because I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to do this. Sorry if I made anybody feel ignored. So nothing is happening. Left a few comments. Great point on Ukrainian situation influence on economies. Thank you. I think that is something that is really, really overlooked. The mansion my local grocer built after COVID is spectacular. Yeah, I guess they can afford it now, huh? Home insurance went. That's another thing that is really affecting. I really appreciate this. Another thing that's affecting it is climate change is causing inflation, right? So, like, especially like in states like Florida, where um, home insurance is like, pun intended, this is the pun show. It's through the roof, um, and it's through the roof because, uh, like, it's like a guarantee almost that your house is going to end up getting flooded, or your roof is going to get blown off, or something. There's going to be some kind of climate damage. Some insurance companies won't even insure Florida anymore. Like, they're pulling out of the entire state of Florida because it's just a loss. And insurance companies are in it for a profit. They're not in it for the humanitarian reasons of making sure that you don't lose your home. And there was this this hilarious rebuttal of Ben Shapiro making this argument a few years ago. Well, if the flood went up, if the water coast went up, what's to keep people from just selling their homes and going somewhere else? And then some guy kind of breaks through a brick wall, or breaks through a door like Jack Nicholson with the axe, and The Shining, and he's like, well, who's going to buy these homes? Bleeping Aquaman? And he's got a point. Like, who's going to want to buy these homes? But even then, it's just like, it's not just the flooding, it's the overall destruction of the homes, and the hurricanes and all of that. And so people right now are realizing that they can't sell their homes, because who wants to buy a home that's going to get destroyed and they can't insure? So that's having an effect. Trump is talking Nazi eugenic language, yes. And that's why I'm like really not ashamed or embarrassed to suggest that what he wants is concentration camps. He is literally pretty much quoting Hitler when he says some of these things, like, the immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. People are like, oh, he's not talking about that. He's talking about vaccines. No, he's not. When he's talking, like, they're like, oh, I'm not vaccinated, I'm a pureblood. Okay, Donald Trump is vaccinated, so he's not a pureblood. So, like, just stop with that nonsense. What he's talking about is pigment. He's talking about pigment. Get that through your head. He's talking about pigment when he says poisoning the blood of our nation. He's talking about pigment. He's talking about the brown people. He's not talking about the people from Finland. He even says, no, I'm not talking about the people from Finland. I'm talking about the people from Africa. I'm talking about the Congos that are coming here. And I'm talking about the people from Guatemala. So, yeah, let's not make any mistake about that. When he talks about poisoning the blood of our nation, he's talking about letting pigmented people in there. Like, he married an immigrant. 4 of his 5 children are children of immigrants. Does he think of them as poisoned? No, because they're from Europe, right? They're not pigmented. It's the pigmented ones he's worried about. All right, so this person may or may not be married to me, but hi, Mary. Thank you. I'm glad you like my logic. That's why you married me. Okay. A builder is planning 500 new homes in my small town. The Biden economy work. Yes. Thank you. That they're like, in my town too. We've built a bunch of new homes under Biden. The Biden economy is working, and like, these new homes are also like, that's, people can buy new homes. People that are building them have jobs, and the people that are working at these restaurants and whatever, like, restaurants have more employees. You go down, there's I live in Elgin, Texas, which is like population now, I think it's like 18,000. When I moved here, it was like 9,000. And in the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of that increase has happened. And you know, like you've got food trucks popping up all over the place. And these food trucks are usually, you know, like you go down around lunchtime, guess who's buying the food there? It's the construction workers. So these food trucks are being given business because of the construction workers. Yes, and Trump was. Oh, thank you for bringing up the tariffs. This was another major talking point that I wanted to get into. Here's what nobody talks about with the tariffs, and it's extremely important. And I know that there's like, I think some people are starting to realize, especially like on the left, tariffs are not paid for by other countries. China does not pay a tariff. What happens is you have Bob, who runs Bob's import-export business, right? And he imports $100,000 worth of widgets from China, right? So the widgets get to the port. Before he can ever access those widgets, there's like an office actually at the port. He has to go and he has to pay the federal government $20,000 to release those widgets from the port. He pays the tariff. Whoever imports the company or whoever imports the goods has to pay the tariff. That's who actually pays the actual tariff, right? Now, there are 3 ways that he can offset the cost of that, right? The first way, and this happened in like the 70s, is that the company that is doing the exporting cuts the cost of their product so that when he goes and he pays that tariff, he's still paying $100,000 total for the import plus the tariffs, right? In the late 70s, when Japan was trying to protect its auto industry, Japan supplemented the private insurance or the private car companies so that they would pay the tariff. Like that actually did happen. And then that protected the Japanese auto industry so that Americans could still, you know, like when Americans went and bought their new Honda Civic or whatever, like they were still paying the same amount of money for it. That does not happen anymore. There's something. There's 2 other ways that can tariffs can be paid for, and one is the import company just pays for it. Like they just pay for it, and everything else stays the same. The third way is what's called a pass-through, and the pass-through rate is like 100%. This is the only way that tariffs are actually paid for anymore, and that is that when they pass through the cost, meaning when they sell the widgets to the middleman they raise their price by 20%. Then the middleman raises their price by 20% when they sell it to the retailer, and then the retailer raises their price by 20% when they sell it to the consumer. But because of the way math works, if by, you know, like say by the time, you know, like let's say it was $1 a widget and then it went to $2 a widget. So the 20% is 20 cents for the importer, right? But by the time the consumer buys it, it's 40 cents. But the consumer, that 40 cents, or that, you know, eventually 40% is out of their income. It's not like their income is relative to the tariff the way it is with everybody else in that chain of events, if you follow me. So it's not like they're getting a tariff raise or something. They're making the same amount of money. If they're making $20,000 and all of a sudden everything costs them 40% more, that's not their employer's problem. So this is actually and this is the thing I wanted to focus on. Tariffs are actually not only a sales tax, they're a highly, highly regressive sales tax. The less money you make, the higher percentage of your income it is. And the reason for that is, let's say you make $400,000 a year, right? And you know, like 20, you know, you spend $200,000 a year, you live a fairly lavish lifestyle, but not, obscenely so. And you have, a significant expendable income that you invest in and, you don't pay taxes on and all of that. But the actual amount of money you spend at the store is, even, you spend 200,000, but, not all of that is affected by tariffs. Maybe your tariffs, your sales tax is only 5 or 10% of your income. But if you think of tariffs on China, like, just follow me through the logic here. What who is paying for these products from China? Where are they being sold? What is the biggest retailer of stuff from China? And if you're in the communal mind right now, you're saying Walmart, right? Like, everybody knows I'm talking about Walmart. Then if you look at who shops at Walmart, it's the poorest people. Why? Because it's cheaper. And why is it cheaper? Because they buy everything from China. So the people that it punishes the most are the poorest people. That they're going to have their taxes are going to go up the most, even though it's not technically called a tax. But the ones who are really paying the tariffs are the poorest people. And so he's talking about, these tax cuts and stuff like that. Trump talks about his tax cuts, but here's the secret behind his tax cuts that, again, doesn't get discussed. Poor people don't pay federal income tax. They don't make enough money to pay for taxes. Like 47%, I think, don't pay actual income tax. They pay their Social Security tax, and he's not talking about cutting those. So their tax bill isn't going to change at all. He talks tip workers and stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay. The guy that you went to Applebee's, that waiter, he's not paying federal income tax. He doesn't make enough money, and he doesn't report all his tips anyway. But the lawyer that works for Applebee's can start working. I'm going to work for tips now. And so he gets like a $500,000 tip that he doesn't have to pay taxes on. So that's why there's a big difference between Kamala Harris's tax cut for tips and Donald Trump's. And there's also a lot of, to me, I'm not a big fan of either one of those, because I think because you work for tips doesn't mean you should get a tax cut, whereas people who work for wages shouldn't get a tax cut. Like, I think, and then the tax cut that most people need that make that little money, it should be in the Social Security end, not on the actual payroll tax. And because they don't pay that anyway, or whatever that's called. And sometimes I get confused on like FICA versus payroll and all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, you know what I mean. So this tariff actually hurts poor people more than anything. If you look at all of Trump's tax policies, they all are very, very regressive and very, very rewarding to the rich. Okay, the irony is that large corporations like illegal immigration because they can underpay them. And this is another thing where I think tax policy really needs to change, or with immigration policy, I'm sorry. I think it's probably not as different as people think it is. Like, documented workers and citizens in Wisconsin that work on dairy farms, they make about $35,000 a year. The undocumented workers make about $30,000 a year. So there is a difference, but it's not like they're working for slave wages. And compared to what they would, like a lot of them, they don't come and just like stay up here for the rest of their life. Some of them do. But some of them are just coming up for seasonal work and then going back home with the money they saved. And, like the money that they made while they were working here is actually a lot more than what they could have made wherever they're at. So, it's worth it to them. But they don't have any worker protections. They can get injured. There's no worker compensation. There's no, they don't have any worker rights. They can't form unions. They can't, fight for themselves. They can get, so there's a lot of stuff to where William is right, where they can't advocate for themselves, and corporations like that, because it actually saves them money to not have to worry about that. So undocumented workers are cheaper for them to employ than documented workers. And that's why you don't really see a lot of, you don't see Kroger trying to get rid of undocumented workers, because Kroger doesn't want to get rid of undocumented workers. Okay, so we hit an hour, and I've gone through all the comments, and I think I've said anything I want to say. But if anybody else wants to ask a question or drop a comment before I sign off, go ahead. I kind of like doing it this way. Yesterday was the first time I did it where I was live and could respond to comments live. And so I think I'll do it this way from now on. And just to let you know, Monday is going to be a fun episode. There's a guy named Mike Nellis, who you may or may not know of. He is, if you know about the controversy with Judge Kaplan and his daughter. Judge Kaplan is the judge that was in Trump's criminal case, and his daughter works for Mike Nellis, and Mike Nellis has a law firm that some kind of firm that represents Democrats. And so the Republicans have been saying there's a conflict of interest. And, they point to this video where, the judge and Mike Nellis were both at the daughter's funeral, as though a person having both their boss and their dad at their wedding is whoever heard such a thing. But the judge Kaplan, referred this to the, there's a board in New York that determines whether or not you have a conflict of interest. He said, look, this is he disclosed everything to them. They looked at it and they said, no, you don't need the disclosures. You don't need to exclude yourself. I can't think of, all of a sudden I dropped the word. But anyway, he didn't need to do that. So he's going to come on and he's going to talk about that. Plus, he's one of the founders of White Dudes for Trump, or White Dudes for Harris. I'm sorry. And if you follow him on Twitter, he is at, and I'll drop his at here in the comments afterwards. He is really, really insightful in terms of polling and stuff. So I'm going to ask him some questions about that too. He's a smart guy, and I think you'll enjoy what he has to say. So anyway, thank you for joining me, and thank you for responding. You really make things better when I can talk to people. So, all right, have a great weekend, everybody, and go Texans.